Welcome everyone to another episode of Wasatch First Podcast. We have our good friend here, my good friend Joel Johnson with JJ Strategies. Really looking forward to this. We were having some fun conversations about our golf game earlier. We're gonna we won't get into that too deep.
The conversations are fun. The golf game, man.
But we're gonna learn more about Joel, his story, as Dalton says. So this is Dalton Granger, my co-host here with Wasatch First Podcast, with Morph Marketing. As he says, we're gonna take the logo that's hiding Joel, and we're going to learn exactly who he is, right? Then we also have our man behind the cameras that you can't see with the hat and the beard, Eric Lichtenberg with Peachy Atomic. So thanks to Morph Marketing and Dalton and Eric and Peachy Atomic for getting all this set up today. So Joel Johnson.
Starting out strong.
Can I say that like it's a curse word?
One of the most interesting people I've met in my whole life. So it was something like 6 years ago we would have met. It would have been the guy who owned this office we're in right now, our good friend Ryan Craner.
Yep.
Owned Action Recovery Group, this addiction clinic up in northern Utah. And I remember getting hired by Ryan and asking him some strategies throughout COVID-19 of like, okay, well, what can we do to expand and grow? And he's like, you know what? He's like, I got a guy. I know a guy. And then I see this 6 foot plus, like 6'3", 6'4", 6'4". Yeah, whoa.
Don't short me.
Yeah, don't short me.
us less than 6 foot guys over.
The 6'4" of a man walking there with, like he's, dressed totally professional, still pants sagging, looked like he'd rolled on a skateboard.
Yeah, that was the last time I dressed like that.
But literally one of the coolest, most down-to-earth and influential people in the behavioral health sphere I've met in my life. Someone I consider a mentor and a friend, and so really glad to have you here and to learn about your story.
Yeah, thank you. Grateful to be here.
Yeah,
for real.
For sure.
So, Joe, I had a short conversation. We met a few times, but I've not really got to know you more. And just so much, I think you're amazing. Just to learn more about you. So, where
you guys are giving me a lot of credit.
Hey, it's about to go downhill.
Yeah, okay, good. Let's be real.
There's a bait and switch.
So, you're obviously in this industry and you've been in it for a while, but where did this start? Because obviously, I know you've had a really, I've only heard little bits and pieces from your story, but where did it start? Because obviously, you've had your own struggles in life to come to where you're at, and incredible. And you've got an awesome family. TikTok following is pretty impressive.
That's getting there.
JJ Flow Show.
Yeah.
JJ Flow Show.
I've made an appearance on there.
Oh, yeah.
So, where did you start in this kind of, obviously, this field of learning about the behavioral industries and other stuff like that?
Well, I would say started in the school of the hard knocks. No, I started, let me fast forward through the rough part of my life, right?
Okay, yeah.
Which was, it's severe addiction, heroin, methamphetamine, all the cool things, criminal justice involvement, plenty.
Really?
Yeah.
As a young guy?
Yeah, between 18 and 25.
Okay, so right out of high school, kind of get into that.
Yeah, and I'd started taking some, pills and stuff here and there in high school, but man, it really took me for a ride, to say the least. And
did you grow up here in Utah?
Yeah,
or?
Cedar City.
Okay.
Yeah, and so how I got into this actually is I was in jail again after however many felony possession charges that I had.
Asterisk again.
Yeah, and so I came up here to go to treatment up in Salt Lake, and while I was in treatment, I was just looking to make some money, right? Quickly, and it just happened to be during political campaign season, and so I met at that time a good friend of mine, Travis Wood. Yeah, so Travis Wood's a good friend of mine, and he plays a huge part of my story. And he introduced me to a guy named Adam Troop, who was the in-house lobbyist for the Association of Counties at the time. And most people may not know how behavioral health is funded in Utah, but traditionally it's always been through the county system. Now it's branched out since then with expansion and all the things that have happened over the last decade. But at the time, behavioral health kind of was run through the counties, and so Adam Troop offered me an internship for the legislative session. Now I was sober maybe 3 months, didn't have any clue what was going on. Wow. Travis Wood and I Travis is really kind of the one that showed me around, took me up to the Capitol and introduced me to the process, and I would have never guessed prior to that I would be involved in politics at all, So it was kind of a cool experience. and that it kind of grabbed a hold of me. One of the first issues I worked on was personal to me. It was about kind of enhancing the expungement process, and at that time I had a lot of, I had a healthy criminal record, to say the least. This is back when, this is. So basically a bunch of possession charges, but
right.
So it was, I was addicted to drugs, and I got all the stuff that came with that.
All the stuff, all the awards, the accolades.
All the awards,
medals.
I walked
those
out
medals
top
are,
of my class.
Those medals are usually handcuffs. Yeah, and that's, we had an episode with Evan Doan recently, who you introduced me to.
Yeah.
So you saw
Evan's a great guy.
Such a good guy. Mary Jo, such a good woman. And I bring that up because a lot of people, when they hear the term lobbyist, there's a few opinions that are controversial that come up with that. And so why don't you explain to everybody what is a lobbyist, and then what specifically as a lobbyist are you offering, and what do you do? Okay,
I'll fast forward the story a little bit, but so let me just give you a little bit of that history. So when after the internship and all that, I went and got my degree in political science. Travis and I set up a partnership, and we started a lobbying firm. And our specialty has always kind of been behavioral health, healthcare more broadly, but behavioral health and criminal justice definitely has been my expertise.
Well, you've got a lot of experience.
I've got experience in both, and so that's not common. Usually you don't have lobbyists that have lived through. It's usually done a different way for whatever reason, but. And honestly, both Travis and I kind of found our way into lobbying that way. But to answer your question, what a lobbyist does is we're kind of it's the hardest thing to explain.
What do you do as a job? Well,
we are there to represent the interests of the clients, whoever we're working for, whether it be a company or a trade association. Like for example, right now I'm working on an issue for the social workers. So I represent the National Association of Social Workers. So as anytime that social work as a profession or a license or anything like that is brought up in policy, which I don't know if you guys are aware, but right now there's a massive shortage of
I've actually seen that on the news and stuff.
Yeah. And so the state is doing some pretty innovative things to try to get access to clinical, or at least expand downward. I mean, I don't want to get into the details of all of what they're trying to do, but for example, right now, so I'm there to help make sure that the social workers are well represented in that process. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does.
Yeah, and so some people have referred to a lobbyist as kind of the opposite of an attorney. So we have about the same reputation, but attorneys litigate, we legislate, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So we're kind of in the process of the ever-changing laws and all those things. Another big part of it is funding, so the state budget and how things are funded. So, for example, Medicaid is, one example of a massive chunk of state funding.
Yep.
The biggest chunk is actually public education, but that's so. And then you get into more details about what is paid for or regulated by the feds versus the state versus the county. There's a lot of differentiation there, and honestly, I think healthcare is the most lobbied industry, and just underneath that is intergovernmental. So you have state lobbying the feds, or you have the counties lobbying the state, or you have, because there are so many layers to regulation and to policy that you really kind of need to have everybody that's going to be affected have a voice. Yeah. And that's usually done through a lobbyist.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, I was talking to you before. I come from England. Like, I have no idea what all of this like gives. You got the federal government, and you got the state government, and you got the local governments that go into the state government. It's really impressive. But there is so many things you have to learn and do when it comes to this. For just being in the state senate and the state capitol buildings and what you do there, then you've got the federal guys like the Romneys and people in this state that go to the federal stuff. But you do a lot more with just in the state stuff, right?
Utah State, and then I'll work with counties, and I'll work with the subsidiary governments of state. But I don't really lobby the feds. I have in some cases, but it's rare.
Okay.
And so
so you've been doing that for quite a while now, and so you've come from the hard knock place, like you said, to coming into like the political, and you've fallen in love with it, right? Is that what it sounds like? You've really come into your own, and you've got so much experience in that to where it drives your passion.
Right.
I think that's actually a lot better than, like Evan was saying last time, is like it's the people that know about these problems and know about these pains that really should be the ones helping guide this, because you've been in there.
Absolutely.
Instead of somebody that's just like, hey, I'm just here to do my job. Instead, there's a lot more passion behind it, and you're really the drive. So
Yeah.
I think that's incredible, and it shows in what you've done so far and what you do on a daily basis. Just seeing you around, you're such a fun, happy guy that it's infectious, man. You're just hanging out here, and I think it's so fun. And then
You should have seen him in Hawaii, November of 2022. We're just rolling around on skateboards.
Yep.
Can I mention?
I got my one wheel, yeah.
Yeah, we're just camel crushes left and right.
Here we go. On blast.
I'm kidding. No, it was an awesome time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know. See, I'm still an addict with nicotine and caffeine. I mean, I still have the same.
And that pizza that they had serving there was pretty addicting too.
Yeah,
but
right. That was fire.
It was so good.
It was good.
Yeah, you're traveling a lot, like we said. Like you've got a great family now as well. Like how old are you've got a wife and
So
kids.
I've got a wife. I got a 7-year-old son and a 5-year-old daughter. Just the absolute world to me.
Yeah.
And so we it's been a fun summer on that front. Yeah, and so to respond to your previous kind of question, so yeah, I love what I do, and I've found that what really drives me, and I think one thing that I have an advantage over other, well, not necessarily an advantage, but for my own personal perspective when it comes to other lobbyists, is I'm in recovery and I work my own program, and so when I'm part of passing a policy or passing major shifts in the way that we do things for behavioral health, I end up seeing it on the ground level as well.
Yeah.
And that's a gift, you know.
Yeah.
So I mean, I remember when we passed what was called the Justice Reinvestment Initiative, and when I say I passed, I'm totally I was a small part of it.
Yeah, right. You're the one that did everything.
Yeah, no, and this was Representative Eric Hutchings that really went to the wall on reforming the criminal justice, kind of the system, you know, and a lot of that was about, you know, we'd done studies and realized that we're essentially incarcerating people with mental health conditions left and right, you know, and substance use. We talked about this a little bit before we started rolling, but mental health has kind of always been, you know, the redheaded stepchild of healthcare.
Yes.
And substance use has been the redheaded stepchild of mental health, and so it's twice removed.
The mental health, right? You were saying like it's such a big part, but like we had a great conversation with Aaron and Evan saying the same thing. It just gets forgotten about. It gets looked away. The mental health side of things, plus the drugs, you know, and it literally is a cycle that you're going to keep incarcerating people that keep coming back and keep having these issues, because there's not enough awareness and there's not enough help for somebody that goes in and says, I've got a substance abuse problem that then pushes my mental health problems. That there's no help, there's no actual help for them. They're just trying to fix the physical side of things, or just saying, hey, you're dumb, you did some bad things, and you're stuck in this place.
Right.
Go out into the world again.
Right.
But that's it. Isn't that the biggest?
That's what we're realizing, I think, as a society, is that you know, not just the incarceration approach, but, you know, being the war on drugs, being tough on crime, you know, all those things that really, in my humble opinion, I think in the vast majority of cases, substance use is self-medicating for a mental health condition, be it what, you know, I mean, that doesn't excuse some of the activities that go along with substance use, because, you know, if people are acting in a way that threatens society, then then we need to act appropriately.
Yes. Yep.
But I think there is much safer and more effective ways to addressing that problem with community-based treatment than there are with incarcerated settings. And so, and that's been kind of one of the big pushes of not just me or my colleagues, but just kind of the state and society, even the country as a whole, you know. So it's cool to watch.
Yeah.
It's been interesting to see Utah lead the way in that in a lot of ways too. You wouldn't think we're such a conservative state, and this really, substance use disorders is a human rights issue, in my opinion.
Right.
But we've been pretty progressive with Medicaid expansion. That wasn't something that many other states would even like dare to do.
Right.
But
And we're a red state too.
Yeah, and that offered so much help to the JRI community, like you said, right? Those JRI clients who are so they're difficult to deal with. That's just the reality. I used to hop in a van and go pick them up from the prison and take him to Weber Recovery Center, you know, and that wasn't an easy population to deal with, but they needed that help. And just like you said, so many of them, they just got caught up in a cycle that started with mental health that became self-medication, and they didn't know how to manage it. And so to have leaders like you know, jumping in and helping to change those laws to help this population that is being, and this is my strong opinion on this, that is being hurt by society and kind of marginalized by society.
Right.
You know, it's a big deal.
And I'll tell you, we have some absolute champions in our legislature. So you mentioned TAM Medicaid. That was Representative Dunnigan's push. It was our first approach at expansion as a red state under the Affordable Care Act, right?
2019,
Yeah, and what he did with with targeted adult Medicaid is what that stands for. Is he really tried to fit it to those people struggling with substance use and mental health conditions. So we're talking chronically homeless. We're talking criminal justice involved. We're talking, you know, from the state perspective and from the budgetary perspective, some of the highest cost individuals. At the same time, we're able to wrap some significantly better benefits in TAM Medicaid than even in traditional Medicaid. Things like 12-month auto enrollment, so they're not churning in and out of eligibility as they get a job, or which is kind of always been a struggle with Medicaid. So I've got to hand it to some of the people that have really been the leaders in this. You mentioned me as a leader. I'd say I'm more of a follower when it comes to these things, but I try to give my perspective as somebody who has picked up a little bit of knowledge about how the system works professionally, and at the same time have some knowledge about how it works, personally, going through it all. So,
well, from my perspective, like when everything that I was going through back in 2019 when I worked for the treatment centers, you were a leader in that. And I still see that today, just so you know. And shout out to everybody who you had mentioned as well, and those people who are being more progressive with human rights issues here in the state of Utah. And so we're grateful for them, but grateful for the work that you're continuing to do in that space too.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
So I guess I'm still, because I'm learning about all of this side of things. Like I've not had the same struggles that some people have had, but it's such a big issue to the point where I've lived in Utah a long time, but you see it. Like I remember being in schools and drugs was a problem, but I was always one of those you just kind of didn't look at it, right? You knew some guys got their lockers raided or whatever in school, or then you see people that I went to high school with that are just you see them on the streets and other stuff, and it's such a thing that you don't really look at a lot of the time. At least when I grew up, I didn't see it all the time. But then now you start being more and more aware of it as you've gotten older and seeing what the pains that they go through. And sometimes it's so hard just to get out of that cycle. And so obviously rehab was good for you, correct? If I'm wrong? So
great.
When you go to that kind of thing, and there just needs to be more awareness and more help. And that's kind of what you're pushing for is
across the. So kind of, and I'm glad you brought that up, because anytime I'm involved with a policy push or with changing anything, my fundamental question is always, is what I'm doing enhancing access to treatment?
Yeah.
Because there are so many different treatment regimens and treatment modalities and different things that I don't understand. I don't think there is a magic bullet or a magic pill that's going to help everybody. So in my opinion, having that diversity of access and making sure that anybody seeking treatment has access to treatment is kind of the fundamental question. So anytime I'm dealing with anything at a systematic level, if I'm unsure, because a lot of times decisions will help these people, but it'll hurt these people, and all these things. And so I always kind of fall back to, is what I'm doing going to enhance access to treatment?
Okay.
And that's kind of the litmus test for if I feel like I'm doing the right thing.
No, that makes sense, because there's so many, like we talked with them, and there's so many different areas or ways people can. There's so many different I know rehab can be expensive for people, and it's a big deal, and so that could be a worry for people. Is can I afford this? Is it a strain on my family and my people that are helping me?
Right.
And at the same time, is this kind of rehab going to help me? Is it going to reach me? Because
exactly,
I think the way Evan put it was it's like a diet. If you're not believing in it, if it doesn't hit you as an individual, you're not going to push for it, and you're not going to believe in it. But there could be another way of treatment that really hits you and goes, this is what's working for me, this is what's helping.
Right.
And it gives me that access to go, that's the one for me, and it's going to get me from going back into my cycles.
Right.
And it's breaking those cycles from what I've seen is what the biggest thing sometimes.
A lot of the time, and again, we're getting into the clinical world where I don't really, I don't want to speak outside of my scope, but I can say that just having that diversity of access, because you're right, like one thing may work better for one person than another thing, you know. Like now we have broadened our view of treatment and recovery so much that now there's a lot of people on medication assistance. There are people trying different medication therapies, you know. There's still if we're on a spectrum here, you have zero tolerance on one end, which was what it was until, you know,
DARE program.
Decade and a half ago or so. And then on the other side, you have harm reduction. And we've really pushed over towards harm reduction, and that includes a lot of different modalities to treatment, and I think that's an incredible win. Now, there's still all kinds of different viewpoints, even within people in recovery, and I can tell you, over the course of since I originally got sober in 2010, I mean, I've tried various different treatments, and and I'll tell you that things look different when I was in the middle of, going to jail and all those things versus when I'm a husband, a father, and I have all the same stressors, and I go through similar, like I remember at one point, I lost my dad, I had a baby, I separated from a professional partnership. There was all these things that happened all at once.
Wow.
And so honestly, if I would go back and say the most difficult thing that I've run into is how to make sure that I'm sound in my own behavioral health over the course of being so involved in it professionally, because that can be kind of a double-edged sword, So anyway.
Yeah, no, you gave me a book that I really loved. It was that Daily Affirmations from Codependent No More, right? And I think we in this community can, even as we champion ourselves to a space where we can help others, we can fall back into forgetting to take care of ourselves, right? And then we just fall apart at the seams. And that's such a huge issue in healthcare, is the burning out of social workers, the burning out of doctors, turnover in treatment centers just left and right. And so figuring out solutions today, so that way we are not only treating the patients, but we're treating the people treating the patients.
Right. Yeah. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. And I mean, and I think we're starting to realize that there are so many different levels of people needing help that don't raise to, shooting heroin in the streets. Yeah. So, and that could start with smaller things. I mean, I could go on for days and days and days.
I really am trying to learn more about this.
Do it.
And how it works.
You're seeing a lot more attention by employers diving into making sure their employees have access to mental health.
Yes, absolutely.
You're having a lot of funding that's coming down to support things like Medicaid, like alternatives to incarceration. It goes on for days and days and days, but I can say over the last 15 years or so, we have come so far on treating this as common of an issue as it is, rather than the shame and everybody needs to be doing great until they absolutely fall apart. So I think that we've made a lot of headway there.
Yeah, like mental health is. People, there's the front, and people have seen it, and some of the most famous people in the world have been like, that make people happiest people in the world, and yet they're the ones that have the hardest time behind that front, behind those closed doors that people just don't get aware of, and every person deals with it. Every person's got their own problems and their own hardships that they've dealt with. Your story is very different to my story. Does that make my mental health different to yours, or like my problem? And it's.
And see, that's where, like, because I've been at this point, I've been through plenty of different things, and I've had it to where my life looks great and everything should be flowing well, but yet internally it's not. And so, and there's been that element of how I perceive treatment should be done has changed so much over the course of my recovery that it's kind of like, okay, at this point, what do I know? So it really just depends on the person, and for me to gauge what would work for somebody else, the only thing that I have is my own experience. And that's not going to be the case for everybody else. But it's been, it's almost always internal. Very rarely does the external circumstances matter, at least in my experience.
Yeah.
For me.
No, yeah, I mean, I do remember, like, I've worked for some companies, and they made sure, like, you knew about mental health. Like, they had apps that was like, hey, you can contact somebody right now for that. And that was not around when I first started in my jobs.
Right, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because technology is starting to play a bigger role, and that's one thing that came out of COVID too. Is COVID really launched technological advancements when it comes to not just telehealth, but even apps dedicated. Like I represented a prescription digital therapeutic this last year, and they were running a pilot on some basically enhancements to the care, and that's how I like to look at it, because most of them are ancillary enhancements to existing care. So you have your traditional treatment, but there's all these things like medications, like apps, like connection, like all these different things that you can add on to a treatment regimen that is enhancing outcomes, and most of it's about connection. And it's been an incredible thing to watch, for sure.
Definitely. I think the more availability to people, like COVID, everyone got stuck at home. Like, I remember a whole year where I just went from work, home. And even then I was working from home most of the time.
Right.
They threw us like, hey, you're working from home. So like, you wouldn't see the sun sometimes. You're just like, oh, I'm just going to stay inside. And it was such, like, I had my wife, right? But like a lot of people that were just stuck at home and they couldn't leave. And they were like, different states had different rules. Like, my family in England were very much on lockdown. My mom got COVID and really nearly put her out. And those kind of mental problems can really come in when you just miss, like, I miss connections with my friends, my families.
Right.
And those people that may have moved to another state to go for work, and then they're stuck in their apartment, they're stuck at home. And that's where I think you said, like, technology had to come so fast, because you needed to get to those people that couldn't get that help, couldn't get those kind of situations. And
Right. And I think, I mean, we've seen it kind of both, where people are realizing that being at home and meeting virtually all the time doesn't quite do it for people. You know, there's a lot to that personal connection. And I think what we have done is we've expanded access to treatment so broadly and so vastly through technology that we really are kind of closing some of the gaps on access based on just ability to throw an app on a phone.
Yeah.
You know, that's a big deal.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, no, what you said, that so long as you're creating access to care, I've mentioned this before, this is one of the bigger things that I learned during my time working in addiction recovery, was working with Rick Visser up north. You know Rick, obviously.
I know of him.
So Rick, he had like 27 plus years or something in the addiction recovery world by the time I met him, formerly led Ogden ACT. And I asked his input once because, my mother was dying from addiction at the time, and I had my own things I was going through. And I asked him, I was like, well, which modality is the best? And his opinion to me, being he was an AA kind of guy, but he had a lot of different opinions. He's like, at this time in my journey, it's whatever the patient believes. Like, whatever modality they believe in the most,
right,
is what is going to help them the most, unless it's obviously something that's harmful. And so generating that access to care, I think, is precisely what we need.
Yeah, and I mean, my own story over the course of my recovery, I was on prescription medications for a while that I, would be considered normal. For me, it started becoming a problem. And then again, I tried later on, I tried all the kind of the psychedelic treatments that are becoming more and more mainstream. And honestly, that kind of started becoming, the way my head works, and that, like, I don't want to say that's a problem for anybody else. And honestly, I think there's a ton of therapeutic value to both of those things. But I know in my experience that I can see when my head starts becoming obsessive about, whatever it is. And rather than looking for that therapeutic value, I start looking for a head change. And that can be an issue, And so at this point, I'm all back to the whole 12 steps, recovery, abstinence, all that really has probably had the most substantial and profound impact on my life. And AA is a lot more of a spiritual program than it is therapeutic, if that makes sense. And I've noticed that for me, it's that spiritual connection. I don't want to get too existential on a podcast.
No, well, hey, we'll invite Joe Rogan in just a second.
Yeah, right. But the spiritual connection, and that's what I find, that when I'm not doing well, it's because I'm starting to lack that spiritual connection. And that, so that's.
Isn't it so interesting that just two guys back in the 1930s.
I know.
You know what I mean?
know. And if you look at the 12 steps,
I
like
know.
the core of the 12 steps is almost the same as every major religion. Or like they all are teaching essentially the same thing: reduction of ego, the golden rule, essentially.
Yeah.
So, but the 12 steps is a very practical way for people to achieve that in the depths of the misery they usually arrive at 12-step meetings in. But I think it's very, very similar, and that's why I think there's so many more opportunities coming, because, you know, I've always heard if you can just live the serenity prayer, then you don't have to do any program.
Yeah, and so many individuals struggling with substance abuse disorders or families as well are not aware of the resources available by NA and AA.
Yeah.
Right. Like you can go to Alano Club in Murray, right, and you can go to free meetings all day long if you want. You know, if you're a family member of someone struggling through substance abuse, you can get free help through Al-Anon.
Yeah.
Right? And that's at your local churches. That's all over the place.
Yeah.
So this is a little bit of a shift, but I wanted to ask you this. So, and this is obviously from a lobbyist perspective, not from a clinical perspective, but with all of your experience you've had, where do you see, I guess, from, again, that more legislative perspective, where do you see treatment going in the next few years? Like what trends are happening right now? Like what kind of like support, because you mentioned a bit about plant medicine earlier, and obviously a lot,
Well,
what do you see happening in the next few years?
So I think that there's a ton of value in the psychedelic treatment regimens. I think it's a little scary to throw it into substance use, in my opinion, but I think there's so much value being demonstrated for like PTSD and other mental health conditions that I think we're going to see a big rise in that. And we've already seen the legalization of cannabis, and people are starting to, I mean, going back, I think the war on drugs has been a giant mistake, and it's become clear.
We lost that war.
Yeah, we lost that war, and
sure.
but that we basically scheduled everything, you know. And so I think we do so much more damage by involving somebody in the criminal justice system for using really anything than the actual substance does, you know. And so I'm always in favor of more, even access to meds, but as a person in recovery, I can understand the hesitation there. And when it comes to things like psychedelic treatments, or like right now it's the ketamine, we had a mushroom bill this last year. A lot of states have started legalizing those again. And I think there is some therapeutic value there. And I think we'll kind of see as we go over the next few years, those things start to come up. And what I would really like to see, and this is a little probably too clinical for me to voice it, but I think substance use as a diagnosis is kind of a mistake. I think it's almost always a symptom of a mental health condition. Yeah. And so I would like to see, you know, because substance use almost always infers that it's a criminal justice issue, and that's how it's been. I would like to see things kind of mold together to where it's mental health as an umbrella, rather than substance use and mental health. And I think over the next 10 years or so, I think we'll start going that direction. The thing is, we've created such different treatment regimens based on usually the criminal justice aspect, or you know, the harm that comes with substance use.
Yeah.
But I think we're starting to realize that's really, we're calling the same thing two different things.
Yeah, and some people might call this anecdotal, but I had this experience growing up. I was in an addict home, as well as loads of crimes and crazy stuff going on in the house I grew up until I was 12. And I remember thinking when TMI Elijah, when I got some criminal charges when I was 12 with my brother Steven, because we were, you know, a little dynamic duo.
12.
And I remember thinking to myself, they put us in this big old van with all these other kids. There were like 18 of us, and we're gonna go do community service, clean up a church, clean up a bunch of stuff. And all these kids were using drugs. And I was just like...
You got a whole bunch of new connects there.
I was like, what a mistake.
Yeah.
I was like, that was the quickest way to ruin all of our lives, was to introduce me to Max and Jamie and all these people.
Yeah.
But if we treat it more from that, like you said, like, look, there is some sort of void inside of these individuals abusing substances that needs to be filled.
Right.
For some people, it's childhood trauma, CPTSD.
Yeah.
You know, we don't know what that may be. And so that's the even AA would say the exact same thing, right? Like there's some sort of underlying issue that needs to be addressed first,
Right.
rather than connecting them to all their new homeboys. And
Right, for sure. And so AA kind of being the more spiritual approach, they're a lot less concerned about why you are the way you are. It's more about you're this way, here's how to fix it. And the therapy and a lot of different, psychotherapies have another element of understanding why you are the way you are, whether it's childhood trauma, and sometimes it's great both ways.
IFS, have you heard of IFS before?
I haven't.
I'm dating a therapist right now. Biggest mistake of my life. No, I'm just kidding. She's fantastic.
She's probably diagnosed you already.
She already has.
Okay,
Yeah, no,
good.
but she taught me about IFS, which is parts therapy. So is that like childhood trauma, your teenage part, your younger part, all that. It's like CBT, but a deeper layer of CBT basically. And it's just interesting to have those things dissected and be like, oh, that's where all these issues came from.
Yeah. Well, and there's been a lot of modalities that have come out, and a lot of it's just simply because we're reducing the stigma on substance use. So we're broadening the approaches to treatment. It's not looked at as a moral failing like it, less and less is. And I think we're just moving in the right direction as a society, and it's impressive to
I
watch.
love that. That's so awesome to hear, like, right out of the mouth of babes, right?
Yeah, yeah, right? Yeah, yep, reduce the stigma.
Yeah, I love it.
So it's a lot of people that, so again, I'm still learning all in this industry myself, and it's great because a lot of people might be like me where they just don't know it enough or don't see it in their lives enough where, they're just kind of blinded out. But,
Right.
So there's a lot of people that have been, like you're saying, like they've had hard times in their lives and they've ended up turning to substance abuse. So you're trying to, instead of looking at that turn to the abuse part, it's, hey, what started this? What made you go, I'm having a hard time, I want to get
Right.
away from it. Like, I know alcohol is one of those vices, and then it goes into this, and then it can go into drugs, and
Yeah.
that's so you're pretty much what you're trying to do is, from my understanding, and please, this is a problem, yes,
Right.
but if you don't solve the first problem, how can you
The
solve
underlying
this?
issue, right? And that's that's not just there with substances. People
Yeah.
are addicted to work, to gambling, to sex,
Right.
to whatever it is. So there's
Sugar.
there's all
Obesity.
kinds of different
Hey, Diet
addictions
Coke's a real
out
problem,
there,
man.
and so, but yeah, right, Diet Coke. But yeah, really having whatever's going on underneath there be the focus. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Dr. Gabor Mate, but he's done a lot of work on the harm reduction model and meeting people where they're at. So that's a lot easier to see with people in the midst of a substance use disorder because they're generally in a pretty bad spot. But really in society as a whole, identifying traumas and identifying things. And I think that's where people are much more likely to seek mental health treatment now than they were 10 years ago.
Agreed.
Across the board.
Yeah.
And so I think we're doing well.
That's
We're doing
awesome. I love hearing that.
And so I appreciate your time, and I know we're kind of running on that. So one thing I love to ask people is, how do you find, because you're a professional, right? But you've also had a lot in your life, and you've got a family now that you really, you love, and they push you to do better. And
Yeah.
what is success for you when it comes to professional as a lobbyist, but as well as in your personal life when you see things and what you want for your life as well?
Man,
How would you
so
define
that's
success?
Yeah, so that's how do I define success?
How would you see? Yeah,
Well, I'll tell you, lately I've been a lot more focused on my family and my home life, and I can tell that over recent years I got too ambitious at work to where I start seeing. The way I would define success is a healthy balance. Okay, a healthy balance between all the things that matter to me, because I can tell you the way I feel about my family matters more to me than the way I feel about work.
Yeah.
But it can, depending on which one's doing better at the time, I could be, all over the place.
Yeah.
So, but a good balance is really what I'm working on right now. And I've been spending a lot of time with the family this summer. We've been, just really digging in on that. And that's because I feel like that's kind of where I've lacked over recent years. But I'm always willing to grow and change, and I'm always open to change my mind. Like all the things that I've even talked about today, I may have a different opinion a year from now, and I'm okay with that, because things should change as we grow. But but I can say, so that's probably how I define success is open-mindedness, willingness to grow, and good balance.
That's awesome. I mean, a good work-life balance. Sometimes, like I know in the past, it's not always been that way. In years like before, like it's like, hey, you gotta go to work, and then you come home, and then if you're your family too much, sometimes you're saying like your work can really suffer. But how do you find that perfect balance? You're always gonna change it. It's always got. And I love that, like your open-mindedness. Like you're saying, next year might be a totally different. That's incredible to think about, and you're like, I remember last year I probably was very different thoughts on these certain subjects.
For sure.
You're ready to take that and go, yep, I've learned from this. And you've got an awesome family. I've seen your kids.
Love it.
Follow them on TikTok for family stuff.
JJ Flow Show on TikTok. Get after me.
But like,
and I can just speak to it from seeing myself. You know, I was in. You remember back in November, I was in a pretty rough spot, and I remember hanging out with you during that time. And you know, your wife bringing up Chinese food to us, us and Sai, and to them, and I could just say this, like I've seen as your friend, I've seen that transition to focusing on your family, going to Disneyland, all these things, which I've really respected and loved to see for you. But just so you know, back then, if you thought your focus wasn't, your family adores you, man. Like I saw the way your kids looked at you, I saw the way your wife looks at you, like. Literally, I just, dude, I'm just proud of you, man. I just think you're killing it in life. And like, if you haven't heard it from someone, you heard it from your buddies over here at Wasatch First. So,
nice.
Super proud of you, man. Thanks for all the work you're doing.
That means more to me than anything. And I don't think I've done a bad job necessarily or anything like that. I just can tell when my focus shifts, and I've learned so much about behavioral health over I start to understand my own a little better.
Yeah.
I mean, that's always the hardest one.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, when I feel healthy, when I feel grounded, is when I have a healthy balance. So,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, thanks for taking the time and just learn. I get to learn so much about you and this whole industry more and more every time. So I appreciate your time coming on, and
of course.
And thanks for
having me. Sorry for all the tangents.
I love it.
Just last thing, if you have any last shout outs you want to give anybody to our audience, or any last things you want to say.
Sure. Shout out to my wife.
She's gonna watch.
Shout out to my kids. Let's and a shout out to you guys.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks,
It's good to have you on. We're grateful for it.
Yeah,
of course.
Appreciate it. And thanks for everyone watching, and we'll probably see you next time. Cheers.
Right on. Yeah.